What is up, basketball fans? Welcome to the NBA Outlet. I'm your host, Nick Fay. With me, as always, Kory Waldron. Kory, how we doing?
We're back. We're better than ever. Nick was on his, we'll say like all-star break, his bachelor party. He was living life in Vegas. Not to be confused with the NBA Summer League, but Nick was still out there. And now we are back to our regular scheduled programming.
I'm back. I survived. I did miss basketball and recording, so we're happy to jump into it. And as always, quick reminder, you can find us on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, OTGBasketball.com, and YouTube. But, Kory, there's plenty of things to talk about. Obviously, I haven't watched a ton of basketball, but I can pretty much pick your brain. Let's start off with Ben Simmons, who just had a back injury. He's going to be reevaluated, I believe, in 2 weeks, and he's dealing with a nerve impingement in his lower back. And it was at a point where he missed the game. He went into the next game against Milwaukee and had to leave early. How concerned are you about this injury with Ben Simmons?
Anytime you hear nerve, you should be somewhat concerned.
And back.
Right. Yeah, the back too being the part of that. I think nerve, I think about like Markelle Fultz had some nerve issues in his shoulders. We saw how long it took for him to finally get back on the basketball court. Obviously, these aren't shoulders, but this is still the lower back, the biggest, most important muscle to, any person on this planet is your back. Your back is critical for everything. And Ben Simmons now has that pinched nerve in his lower back. They don't even have a timetable. We really don't know how long Ben Simmons will be out for. We don't know if he'll be back, when he'll be back. It's definitely concerning for Ben Simmons, the player. But if you're Philly, I don't know how overly concerned you are because, again, not that I think you should trade Ben Simmons or Joel Embiid. But so far this season, there has been clear-cut 3 different Philadelphia 76ers team, right? You have the 76ers when both Embiid and Simmons play. Then you have the Sixers when just Simmons plays. Then you have the Sixers when just Embiid plays. We've seen Embiid put up, 49 points, career high against the Atlanta Hawks, without Ben Simmons. Obviously, the Atlanta Hawks, he played no defense, so keep that in mind. I think it's worrisome from Ben Simmons' health perspective. But again, this Philadelphia 76ers team has played better overall basketball when 1 or 2 of these guys have been out of the lineup. So maybe they actually gain more of an identity with Simmons out. But again, long term, this isn't good because if you actually have title aspirations, you need both Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid to be out there.
Especially because, like you mentioned, the chemistry hasn't been there when they're both out there. Like, the team is just kind of confused on how they're going to play. It's rare that we see Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid both have good games. It feels like they've played better when the other one is out, and they can kind of be that true superstar and carry the team. So it's interesting from the Philly perspective, from not only obviously you're worried about, your 23-year-old fringe superstar, whatever you want to call Ben Simmons. It creates a narrative like, oh, wow, the Sixers play better without Ben Simmons, or the Sixers play better without Joel Embiid. And in ways, it could be a benefit for the front office, getting a view like, hey, if we trade Simmons, this is kind of what the team would look like. And now we already know what the team will look like if we trade Embiid. So there's a little flexibility there. I'm not saying that's the way they're going to go. We talked about it a few episodes ago, but it is interesting. And you worry about Simmons and his health for just this season because a lower back injury is a type of thing that I think will keep popping up. And you mentioned it, use your back for everything. But in basketball, you might use it more than any other sport when you're just constantly bending over, jumping, and exploding all over the court. And we know what type of game he plays. Probably one of his best skills is the explosion and transition. And without having that explosion, I just don't think he's going to have the same impact. So I think they're going to be safe with it. But at the same time, Philly wants to get that chemistry and just get things rolling because we've yet to really see them roll this season considering the amount of talent they have on that team.
Yeah, especially when you take into the fact of the issues Al Horford's had, especially as of late,
Yep.
Him going strictly to a bench role, which I don't think is going to be, a for sure thing for the rest of the season, but it definitely is for the foreseeable future. So the fact you have one guy who's on a max deal already underperforming, and now you have this Ben Simmons injury, it just hasn't been a good year for Philly, which was going into the year, we're all in, defensive first, we're going to be damn tough to beat. And, besides them being 27-2 at home, this is not a team outside of being in Philadelphia that you're that scared of.
Yeah, there's definitely some concerns with that roster and just the fit and everything. And it's like you just don't really kind of know what to expect from them when it comes to the postseason. Who knows? They could turn it on because they have so much talent, but they've yet to really showcase that, at least on the road. Like you mentioned, the home record is really good. But moving over to the Western Conference, the playoff race is really heating up for that 8th seed. We got Memphis at 28-29. We got Portland at 26-33, and then New Orleans at 25-33. And there's only 3.5 games separating Memphis, and New Orleans. So this race is really right there. What's your thoughts on this and the things starting to spice up? Because at one point in the season, it looked like the playoffs were almost wrapped up in the West.
Yeah, I mean, this playoff race, you can't even rule out the Sacramento Kings, right? I mean, the Kings
True.
technically still
And the
have.
Spurs, I didn't even mention the Spurs. The Spurs are
Right.
24 and 32, and the Kings are 24 and 33.
So again, you have, and again, the Kings are 7-3 in their last 10. They're actually of these teams fighting for the 8th spot. The Kings winning 3 straight, as the other teams have kind of struggled, has put the Kings back in the race. Now, I don't even think, technically you can even say the Suns are in it, right? So this is for an 8th seed. You have 6 teams all battling for this final spot, which is definitely interesting because, as you see from just the layout of the West, there's no one touching those first 7 seeds, but that 8th seed is still up for grabs. And having all those teams in the mix definitely makes it more intriguing. You have, obviously the young rookies in Zion and Ja Morant trying to lead their squads. You have the San Antonio Spurs, who I don't think have missed the playoffs in 20 plus years as of right now. So they have a streak they're trying to keep alive. Of course, we know the Kings. I was high on them going into the year, and they've just been bad. So them getting in the race is interesting. Portland's probably the one team to really watch. Obviously, Lillard's missing some time with a strained groin. But CJ McCollum and Carmelo Anthony just went off for big nights of their own. I think McCollum had 41 and Melo had 32 in their last game combined. So having those two guys go off, Portland obviously trying to stay alive in the playoff race. And, I think they're probably the best team, or they're probably the team I'm most confident about because they have the most star power. But you just can't rule out what the young guys have done in Zion and even Brandon Ingram in that New Orleans Pelican squad. We saw a very good game last night against the Lakers. I mean, this is an interesting race in the West.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Memphis and they have the easiest remaining schedule. You look at Portland, that Dame injury kind of messed with them. You're hoping he can get back and be back to 100% because he was playing like one of the best guys in the NBA. New Orleans obviously has that super excitement with Zion, and then him and Brandon Ingram are getting some nice chemistry. We know what the Spurs have been, like you mentioned, for the last 20 years, and Sacramento is just kind of getting in the mix. Which team do you like to land the 8th seed?
For me, there's 2 teams I really look at, and that's, I mean, you can't discredit Memphis because, as you mentioned, their schedule is going to be easy. That definitely puts them in a good position to be in. But I look at the Pelicans and I look at Portland as the 2 teams to watch. I almost kind of feel good about the Pelicans. Their biggest issue is the fact they just haven't been healthy this year. Brandon Ingram is knocking on the door of max money. We see Zion Williamson, I think it's 12 straight games to 20-plus points or more. Had another big night last night against the Lakers. Drew Holiday's been a little bit streaky shooting-wise, but I just like the depth that the Pelicans have. Derek Favors is still getting healthy as well, getting back into the mix finally last night. I almost want to roll with the Pelicans, but again, the Memphis schedule is tough to roll out.
Actually, I made a mistake. Memphis has the toughest remaining schedule, so that hurts them, and New Orleans has the second easiest remaining schedule. So that's a mistake on my part.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So
don't feel good about Memphis anymore.
Yeah. About Memphis, I'm going with the Pelicans then for sure if they have an easier schedule. I think the Pelicans, again, this was a team that all year long has been very good offensively. And I think I've mentioned this before in the pod. I don't know the exact number now because I haven't been keeping up with it. But at one point in time, they had 42 games played, and 28 of those 42 games were decided by less than 10 points. I have to imagine that there's still that kind of differential in the amount of games they're actually losing by double digits. So I'll say the Pelicans because I don't know. There's something wrong with Portland, and I just don't think Damian Lillard can do enough. I don't think he can do it all.
Yeah, and I mean, New Orleans, you mentioned the 10-point differential in the close games, and it seems like Zion is a type of factor that can change, 10 points in a game with just, his offensive rebounding, his defense, and just adding that kind of spark to the team. They've just kind of felt different watching them. And like I mentioned, a little concerning with the Dame injury. And then I was kind of high on Memphis, but then when I misread the schedule, then obviously, it doesn't look too good, especially for a young team having to grind out against other playoff teams that are looking for seeding. And I think there's still a good chunk of teams that are going to have to play into the end of the season because the playoff races, even though they're locked up in terms of top 7 or top 8, they're trying to fight for that, 2, 3, 4, 5 seed, trying to get the best matchup possible.
And it's worth noting, too, that Brandon Clark for the Grizzlies, another rookie who's been a standout this year, he's out for at least 2 weeks with a bruised thigh. A guy who's averaging, 12 and 5 on 62, 40, and 78 shooting splits. This has been a guy crucial to the Memphis Grizzlies' success to this point in time, and the fact that he's going to miss time isn't great.
Yeah, exactly. It just puts a lot of pressure. There's going to be different pressure for a young team that a lot of the players just have never experienced. And I think for San Antonio, a lot of people probably mention them, but just doesn't feel like their season. Just everything just kind of feels sour in that San Antonio look, where New Orleans has that pop. And I'm never going to doubt Dame Lillard. If he can get back healthy, he'd probably be my favorite, but I'm just a little concerned with the health.
Yeah, I'm right there with you on the Spurs front. It just doesn't feel like their year. There's just not enough 3-point shooting and defense on that roster. It's just it's an aging team. Their best players are either I think DeRozan's probably still in his prime, whereas Aldridge is clearly on the decline of that part of his career.
Yeah, and I think the supporting cast, it doesn't necessarily match up for what they need to do. It's like a combination of trying to develop guys and at the same time compete, and it's just not really working out for them. But any other thoughts on the Western Conference playoff race for that 8th seed?
No, I mean, it'd be interesting to see if Phoenix or Sacramento can edge themselves more into this race. Obviously, we know the Kings dealt off some of their veterans at the deadline. They're playing more of their young guys now, and Buddy Hield Buddy Hield was always playing minutes, but now Bogdanovich is playing more minutes. Harry Giles has been playing more minutes. Maybe if that team starts to get things going, that could be a team to watch. And obviously, the Phoenix Suns have had an interesting year. Really had that hot start right for the first 2 months of the season. We were talking about Phoenix being a playoff team. Then they got hit by a boatload of injuries, and they're finally getting healthy again. So maybe that could be a team that makes a run. But again, it just feels like this is going to be a 3-team race between Memphis, Portland, and New Orleans.
Yeah, 2 good weeks might win you the playoff seed. You know what I mean? If you can get hot and go on a nice little winning streak, doesn't have to be anything crazy. Just a 5-game winning streak might be enough to separate you from the bunch. But we talked about playoffs. Obviously, there's plenty of teams in the league that aren't going to be in the playoffs, and they're pretty much knocked out almost most of the Eastern Conference. I mean, you could make an argument that maybe Washington could fight in there, but I'm not feeling too confident on that. So with that said, what non-playoff teams have the most to prove the rest of the season?
What non-playoff? This is from either conference?
Yep.
So the teams that have the most to prove that are not playoff teams. I think one team I would say for sure would be Minnesota.
Yep.
Getting D'Lo. Now, it does suck that we're going to not have Towns for the foreseeable future because of a wrist injury. But still getting D'Lo acquainted with that roster, seeing, what pieces are going to stay, what pieces can you build around a Towns and Russell duo going forward. And then looking at the East, Chicago's a team that, again, like last night, Kobe White had his 3rd straight game of 30 or more points, had 35. Zach LaVine had 41. Was jawing with either a referee or Jim Boylan. I don't know which one, but he was saying like mother effer, I got 40 plus points. Like, don't talk to me. And then he ran down the court and pulled up from the logo and nailed it.
That was tough. Tough.
Definitely a tough. So, I just kind of seeing like what Chicago's doing, right?
Yeah.
Maybe if this year keeps going down the spiral that we see Jim Boylan finally get fired, or maybe we see Zach LaVine say, yo, like, I want to get the hell out of here. Like, please trade me. I don't think he's the type of player or in the position to really kind of demand that. I don't think he's got like the kind of NBA credit that some superstars have you can actually demand a trade. But seeing how Chicago kind of shapes out the end of the year because they have 2 good scoring guys. I could even say Washington. I mean, Bradley Beal had 2 games back-to-back, 53, 55 points, both in losses, and the man looks miserable. So, if that team doesn't get back on track, he may be done waiting for John Wall, right? Obviously,
money doesn't equal happiness.
Right. Every millionaire will tell you this, guys. Money does not make you happy. So I think Bradley Beal in that situation would be another thing to watch. So those would be my 3 teams to watch. And also, I guess, just to throw it in, how Curry and the Warriors, or how Curry and Wiggins look for. Obviously, it won't be them at full strength, at full power out in Golden State, but kind of seeing Curry get back in the mix, seeing what him and Wiggins look like side by side could be interesting, along with Draymond.
Yeah, you had some great choices. I mean, Washington and Chicago, I think there's an argument like if they could turn it on, they could probably make a fight for the playoffs. But
Chicago, only 4 games back in the loss column.
Yeah, I mean, Chicago before All-Star break, it felt like, oh, hey, they might be in the mix, but then they're 1-9 in their last 10. So it just feels like so much negative energy. And it seemed like Bradley Beal really wanted to make the playoffs, but the rest of the team doesn't really care. I think it is important, though, for Washington to at least play well or play competitive so they have an idea of really what team they're going to be. Because, like, yeah, John Wall's a really good player, but he's coming off major injuries. And, like, the rest of the team, other than Bradley Beal, really isn't that good. So would it, even if John Wall is back, it probably still going to make sense to trade Bradley Beal unless you think you have pieces on this roster, which they'll find out for definitively probably by the end of the year. Another Eastern Conference team I'm looking at the Atlanta Hawks. They make the trade for Capella. They're starting to get healthy. There's all this talk about Trae Young needing help. Now, all right, your team is, I wouldn't say a good team, but I would say they're probably a competent team at this point. They have enough talent where they should be competitive in most games, and they should play some defense and definitely win probably close to 25 games, if not more. So I think this is going to be a big stretch for them to have a better idea of how close we really are and if they should try to make some type of splash move this summer, maybe making a trade for Bradley Beal or some other type of star with some of the assets they have.
I mean, that's a great choice. Obviously Atlanta, Trae Young wanted to have more winning pieces. They got Jeff Teague, who really hasn't been much of an impact. Dwayne Dedmon, who's been all right. But you're really looking and waiting for Clint Capella to get back out there. So you have, Capella, Young, Herter, Reddish, John Collins. You can see what those guys look like. I'm right there with you. It's interesting to see what Atlanta can kind of become because, they have so much offense. So you're just waiting for some defense to kick in.
Yeah, and I mean, they were pretty hyped going to the season. I think a lot of people expect them to be maybe in the spot that Chicago or Washington is in, or even Charlotte, like in the playoff mix. Probably not going to make it, but like, hey, we're right there. Maybe one more season, but sitting at 17-42, yeah, Collins was suspended for a lot of time. They dealt with some injuries. I just think this season hasn't been what they hoped for, and playing a lot of young guys, that's going to happen, but still.
Yeah, there's one more news thing I actually wanted to touch on with you today because it happened like an hour or two before we got on the pod. Did you see the Mike Conley stuff today?
Oh yes, Mike Conley will be going to the bench.
No, got reversed already.
Wow, I wonder. That's
right.
interesting.
So Mike Conley so this is the full story because I was hoping you didn't know the second part yet. So Mike Conley at like 1, 2 o'clock this afternoon, we get the news report from Shams that Mike Conley will be moved to the bench and Royce O'Neal will move into the starting lineup. Well, like an hour and a half after that, Shams tweeted, correction now, the Jazz are no longer sending Mike Conley to the bench. They're sending Joe Ingles to the bench for Royce O'Neal. So Ingles will go back to the bench. Mike Conley will stay in the starting lineup. And then, my brain starts working and thinking now, is that Mike Conley saying like, yo, I'm not going to be a bench player? Or is that, maybe Joe Ingles saying, for morale, I should probably come off the bench, keep Mike in, and bring Royce O'Neal. Like the reasoning to why the backtrack to me is more interesting than the actual moves itself.
Yeah, maybe it's just the narrative chatter, around the league, like the Jazz feeling like they look stupid because everyone's saying, "Oh, they trade for this point guard, they're paying him 30+ million, and he's not going to start." Like, you know what I mean? It comes off as kind of weird. So I mean, that situation is definitely delicate, and it's been strange. Like the fact that Mike Conley hasn't been good with them, and they've had felt like more success when he hasn't been on the court. And he has, I think, a player option going to the summer for $34 million. So like that whole narrative is going to be something to watch. I mean, I know we thought it was going to be a good trade. I thought he would like fit in perfectly. Even if he was in a smaller role, he still does a lot of the smaller things, but it really hasn't worked out. And I think that's just another example of things that seem really good on paper, but until you see them on the court, you really don't know. And, Philly could be the same case where we look at that roster, we say, hey, there is so much talent, there's no way they can be bad, but the fit just wasn't there. And that could be the same case with Mike Conley. Who knows? It could take another summer, but you can't feel great for the Jazz about that trade at this point.
No, and again, with Mike Conley as a starter this year, he's at 28 starts. The Jazz are 19-15.
Not great.
Right, as you said, it's not great. And I've had some people on Twitter, they tweeted at me this afternoon. They were like, well, it's Mike Conley's, fit with the team just hasn't been great. Well, I mean, and that might be the case, but there have been too many times I've checked the box score and Mike Conley is, 5 for 19 shooting or 6 for 20 shooting. Like he's just been a very erratic jump shot shooter this season for whatever reason. Now, it could be the injuries. We also know that guards who are shorter, Mike Conley is 6'1", they don't generally age well when they get over 30. So it could be a combination of these things, but either way, The Jazz, who were really hot for a stretch of basketball, have really cooled down, losing 3 in a row, and they need to get back on track.
Yeah, I mean, Conley at 32, he's only averaging 13 points a game, shooting 39% from the field and 35% from three,
Oof.
and he's averaging 4 assists. They're just not numbers you're necessarily seeing with Mike Conley. Not that he was ever really like this big time scorer or anything like that. You just expect a little bit more efficiency playing on a roll with other good players, and it just hasn't worked out. It's just been strange. It's like you can't really put your exact finger on it. I think there's also a factor that you think about it from a person perspective. Like he played his entire career in Memphis. He's going to Utah. It's a completely different city, a completely different vibe. And sometimes off the court things like that can make you feel uncomfortable, and it could translate onto the court.
He's also playing, and just to piggyback off that, he's also playing for the first time with a better, more dominant guard than Donovan Mitchell, which I know that has to play some sort of factor. Actually, I'm going to look at it right now because I'm pretty sure his usage rate last year was 27.3. It's down to 23.4 this year. I mean, that's a slight dip, but this actually isn't a crazy drop in usage rate. He's almost averaging the same that he was when Memphis was really good. But again, it still is a different scenario.
Yeah, and I mean, the usage rate could still be high, but I mean, everyone knows Donovan Mitchell's the guy there, and he's having the ball, he's taking the clutch shots, and he's really running the show for the most part. And then you have Ingles, who initiates the offense as well at times. So it's just like, I think it's different from any role he ever really had with Memphis, because I think like you think offensive players in Memphis, they had Marc Gasol, who was good, at certain points. They had Rudy Gay, who was good at certain points, but it never was like, hey, the Grizzlies are filled with great offensive players.
Yeah.
Not that the Jazz are like this super offensive juggernaut, but they do have a lot of offensive talent with Donovan Mitchell, Bogdanovich, Ingles, and even Rudy Gobert as a rim runner is just having an impact.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a lot. I mean, if you think about the play styles of that Memphis Grizzlies team that he was a part of in the Utah Jazz nowadays, besides having, a very dominant big man defensive first minded and like Marc Gasol and Rudy Gobert, the offenses are completely different, like night and day different.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, even just the entire scheme is probably different. But Kory, I'm going to pass it over to you for Believe It or Not.
Believe it or not, this is your favorite segment of the week that we haven't done in a couple weeks. So first one, LeBron James and Al Caruso had the best net rating of any two-man combo in the NBA that's played 150 minutes or more. They're plus 24.7.
I mean, man, I believe it in the extent that, like, obviously they're not the best two-man duo, but Caruso just does all the small things that a player needs to do when they're playing with a guy like LeBron. Like, Caruso is just a great role player, and when you're playing with two of the top 5 players in the league, obviously all those minutes aren't with AD, but there's a chance, he's out there for a decent chunk. You're going to have success when you know how to play intelligent basketball. And I think that's one thing Caruso does. He knows what he's doing out there, and he understands what he needs to do, what he can do, and what he can't do.
Plays within himself,
which a lot of players don't. And like, that's no disrespect to them. You should aim for the sky, but at certain points you have to realize, like, hey, I'm not going to be an all-star, or I'm not going to be a superstar, but I can be a star in my role. And I think usually the best teams have multiple players that can do that, and obviously the Lakers are one of the best.
Yeah. Next up, the highest on-off court point differential per 100 possessions this season, minimum of 1,200 minutes. These are the top 5. LeBron James, 13.3.
Big surprise.
Rudy Gobert at 12.7. Chris Paul at 11.8. Jason Tatum at 11.7. And around out the top 5, Bojan Bogdanovich at 11.2. So 2 members of the Utah Jazz in this top 5 of highest on-off court point differential.
I think Bogdanovich is the most surprising. But he's kind of been that missing piece for like what the Utah Jazz have needed the last few seasons. We know they've been that defensive juggernaut, and then adding a player who is competent defensively and has the offensive game that Bogdanovich has developed over his NBA career is just a nice fit. But a lot of the guys, you kind of expect them there. LeBron, you expect there. Rudy Gobert, you expect there. Chris Paul is having an amazing season. It feels like he hits clutch shots every single night, and Jason Tatum's on the rise. Like, Jason Tatum is starting to peak at what everyone envisioned after that rookie season.
I mean, his last 2 games, they ring out 41 against the Lakers on Sunday, and then last night having 36, and a career high 8 3-pointers, which one was just like a disgusting, like, dribbled back, I'm going to take 2 steps up and just drain this in your mouth 3. So he's been a very bad man.
His confidence is just soaring through the roof. And like the shots that he was taking that he was missing earlier in the season, he's just starting to hit them all. So it's like he probably worked on those shots. They just weren't falling early on. And now it's like, oh, shit. Like, man, it's a big thing for the Celtics right there. And that could be a huge factor in the Eastern Conference playoffs.
And people were saying, stop shooting the Jason Tatum. Keep shooting.
Exactly.
Next up.
Shoot or shoot.
Yeah, the team with the 5th best effective field goal percentage on jump shots in the NBA. You're not going to believe it. The Detroit Pistons.
I'm not going to believe it. I'm that surprised right now.
Yeah, so the 5th best team in effective field goal percentage on jump shots in the NBA is the Detroit Pistons, shooting 37% on those jump shots and 51.3% on the effective field goals on those jump shots, which is ridiculous because the Detroit Pistons have had a boatload of injuries and they're just not a good basketball team.
Yeah, and they've dealt with a ton of injuries, and like they just don't have a ton of shooters where you're like, hey, these guys are going to shoot lights out. I mean, a big issue for them going to the season, I think we probably did the preview, was like lack of shooting, and then all of a sudden they're killing it from jumpers.
Yeah, ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. I don't believe it. I just feels like one of those weird outliers. Like I remember right beginning of the season, the Wizards had the second best offense, I think, for like the first 2 months of the season. I think they're still actually up in the top 10. I had to check that.
I wouldn't be surprised if like the Detroit factor is that everyone doesn't respect their shooters, so they get so many wide open looks.
That's possible too. Next up, Josh Hart converts 80% of his putbacks in the NBA. That's 7th in the NBA.
That's surprising, but I feel like usually guards sneak in, so they have an opportunity where they're not getting boxed out and they just kind of pop in there and get the easy layup because like the big is focused on the other big and the other guard's probably trying to leak out. So I feel like anytime you have a good offensive rebounding guard, their putback rate is going to be high.
Yeah. So next up, the Celtics are 22-5 when Jaylen Brown scores 20 points or more, believe it or not.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I would probably be intrigued to see what it is when 2 out of the 4 of Kemba, Gordon Hayward, Jason Tatum, and Jaylen Brown score over 20. If 2 of them score 20 plus, I feel like the Celtics record is probably really good. And if it's 3 out of the 4, they probably haven't even lost a game.
Yeah. So 2 more, and these are both Houston Rockets related. And they're both also coming from Friday of last week, so they may be slightly out of date. Russell Westbrook is currently averaging his highest field goal percentage of his career at 46.4%, his highest 2-point percentage at 51.2%, his second highest effective field goal percentage of his career, and his third most points per game at 27 points per game. Believe it or not. Or is this just an outlier because of the small ball that the Houston Rockets are running?
Yeah, I think it's definitely correlated to the small ball because what it does is it opens up the paint completely and it's almost impossible to help. And we know what type of player Russ is. The problem was that all you had to do was clog the paint a little bit, especially with those OKC teams because they lack shooters. It was tough for him to get in the lane. Now he's probably had more space inside than he's had in his entire career, and he's taken advantage of it.
Yeah. So now James Harden's stat. Now this one is interesting. James Harden's step back 3 is only down on a normal 1.5% from 3. His wide open attempts from 3 are down 10%. Believe it or not.
That's interesting. I mean, I think they're almost completely different shots. Like they're obviously both 3-point shots, but you're getting a gather, you're dribbling the ball, and you're kind of in rhythm, and he probably shoots more step backs. So I would assume that just having the higher volume helps in that aspect. And then maybe even on the catch and shoots, I would look at it from this perspective. I doubt he has many catch and shoot threes early in the shot clock.
Let me add a little bit more context to that. There's another part of the tweet that I didn't see. So he's on the step back 3 points. Wide open, his attempts are down 10%, and his wide open step backs where there's 0 dribbles are down 6.6%.
He likes, I mean, some players shoot better with, dribbling the ball first, and it kind of gives him that rhythm. And that's something that obviously has happened with Harden. I think he's just kind of been like not in the same funk, and some of it could just be playing with Russ too.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, obviously, we know how bad his numbers were to start off the year. I mean, obviously, he's been a lot more efficient as they've kind of transitioned into this smaller, this small ball lineup that they're rolling with. But yeah, it just feels like an outlier. I mean, the guy takes so many jump shots, especially with how bad he was that first, month and a half of the season. I feel like it's almost like, a climb to get your numbers even respectable when you shoot as often as he does, and you were in such a bad slump.
Yeah, 100%.
And that's going to do it for Believe It or Not.
All right, that wraps it up. A little bit of an express episode, but I'll be back in basketball mode the rest of the week. We'll be dropping one on Monday morning. Kory, always a pleasure talking hoops. Big thanks, everybody, for listening. You can find us on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, and otgbasketball.com.
Peace out, knuckleheads.